Hi, I'm Dan Sandhu from Sparks. Welcome back to another conversation with. Today I am joined by Julian from the Spencer Group. Hi, Julian.
Hi Dan, how you doing?
Great. Julian, could you, for the audience's benefit, could you give a bit of a background about yourself and specifically about Spencer Group?
Yes, of course. So myself, I've been a headhunter for circa 25 years. I've stopped counting now, it makes
Yeah.
me feel old.
Yeah.
The Spencer Group, more importantly, been established now for over 20 years.
Yeah.
Specialist global boutique,
Yeah.
circa 25 people, multi-award winning. We're very proud to have won 3 out of the last 4 years of the Educational Investors
Yes.
Recruiter of the Year. Built our reputation globally on honest expectation management and consistent delivery.
Yeah.
We have a 97% delivery rate.
That's brilliant. I've been running these video blogs over the last few months, talking to individuals like yourself in the market, be it commentators, bankers, or operators, to really understand the different elements of the education edtech market. So how did you get into the education market? I mean, education sector, because I mean, a very specific niche sector in terms of headhunting, but then an even more niche sector, education edtech.
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Well, being in 2 sectors was strategic. So many years ago, I was in a specialist headhunter in the .com environment.
Okay.
At its height, there was 180 people.
Okay.
When I left, there was 9. One sector. When that closes down, there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
So when I committed to myself, I was ever going to run my own organisation, I would definitely be in more than one sector.
Yeah.
Then we deliberately picked 2 sectors that we considered to be global.
Yeah.
That spreads your risk.
Yeah.
2 sectors that are also predominantly private equity backed or VC backed because of their pace and scale.
Yeah.
And thirdly, 2 purpose driven sectors. So we're in pharmaceutical technology and in education, predominantly private education, and on a global basis.
Yeah.
So the other major driver, of course, as a headhunter is there's massive skill shortage in it.
Yeah.
Globally, there is not enough talent, especially within EdTech, to support the growing demand. So therefore, we've been supporting it for a significant period of time.
And what's your biggest learning been?
Biggest learning within EdTech? Well, if I sit back, first of all, it's as a market, it is not one space.
Okay.
Because within it, there are multiple pieces with its own variety, and I'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah.
But we've learnt that the dynamics of the different edtechs supporting the different parts of the education spectrum by nature are quite different. If you're going into major vocational skilling B2C environment, that's a very different skill set than if you're in a enterprise solution to global higher education institution.
Okay.
We've learnt that your K-12 sector is a very different sales environment for edtechs than it is to higher education. Higher education is a much bigger spend per customer and less fractured, for instance. So the biggest learning is that actually, candidly, the candidates that thrive in the environment understand that they need the positive impatience of an ed tech entrepreneur and the patience of a saint to deal with majorly large public bodies as customers.
I think that's a fascinating way to describe it, because it's very easy. Even I get lost in the trying to narrow education or ed tech, but it goes all the way from early learning to lifelong learning and everything in between. So it is a vast sector, albeit it's quite easy to get yourself tagged into education. So it is a vast sector.
Yes.
In terms of hiring into that sector, and you can pick any one of those areas, and it's got a big one. What are the unique challenges? I mean, because you look at pharmaceutical technology, but you look at general management in lots of other technology sectors. What's specific about education, you think, in terms of type of candidate and the hiring challenges you may have?
Well, first of all, if you're hiring from outside a sector, the biggest challenge is actually explaining what edtech is.
That's okay.
Right? Yeah, because if you're taking somebody out of mainstream insurtech or neobanks or big fintechs. Whenever you say education, everybody thinks about, especially in the West, everybody thinks about publicly funded slow education.
Yeah.
So ed tech, education to the sector is the big one.
Yeah.
Then we would flag that it's depending where you want to go, what sort of talent you need. So inside sector recruitment tends to be chief commercial officers, chief product officers, that, and it's debatable actually about whether the best CEOs come from within sector or out. But also then we recommend outside of sector recruitment in things like marketing and finance and technology, because you can bring learnings and better skill sets from external. So I still come back to the biggest demand though is just true leadership. What's missing in the space is those people that can truly galvanize and lead teams. We're being asked for individuals that can corporatize and scale up, because there's a lot, as you know, the marketplace is dominated by predominantly small organizations. But the amount of private equity investment over the last few years has gone in to help grow, or VC to be fair. Now private equity is coming in and they want to come in and corporatize and grow up, and therefore you need individuals that understand what operating at scale looks like, what good looks like at 50, 100 million, 200 million, half a billion.
No, I think that's very true. It's a nature of the sector that it's a lot of small companies and a few large companies. Exactly. To get small companies to be large companies, you have to bring in skills. And my personal experience at Sparks has been making sure you bring the skills in wherever they come from, in particular sub-sectors or parts of the business, which internally within EdTech as a whole, you just can't find those skills. Yeah. In terms of the kind of post-COVID, hopefully, post-COVID world we're in, while we sit on this precipice of a recession, what's that doing to your business? What's that doing to the candidates and companies looking for candidates?
Well, I think in the first part, let's just talk about COVID. COVID, for the first time in the entirety of my involvement in international higher education, caused outside of EdTech some shocks in the private school environment.
Yeah.
The international schools market dropped from being the golden child of private equity for the first time in the entire period. And that's now returned, but at that point slowed that investment. What we saw was a huge investment in EdTech as people realised that distance learning wasn't just going to be for vocational or OPM space, but could now move into the schools environment. And therefore, we've seen big school groups, universities, business schools, and vocational learning continue to go where all the skills we've learned during COVID and having to lose distance, we don't want to lose.
Yeah.
I do think, and you and I think, discussed it during COVID, that it was a windfall if you had good product and good UX and a strong proposition in the first place. Then COVID was good for you, isn't it?
Yes.
It was bad news for a lot of edtechs who had poor UX and a relatively poor product, because then you had lots of parent exposure and a lot of frustration that the product wasn't up to consumer standards. So I think it's done quite a lot of it's been quite Darwin in its shifting. The threat of recession, I think, especially for the edtech market, is real, and it will make private equity and VC look harder at their investments, especially as the price of money goes up. But you only have to look at what European investment in edtech is now gone up by 17% this year. What, an extra 400 million, I think, taking us about 1.4 billion in Europe. First time we've beaten the Chinese for investment from a European point of view. So I see that the edtech environment continues to get investment and grow in Europe. Obviously, US investments dropped back dramatically. I mean, mind you, it's a bit difficult to decide on the figures because depending on who you look at, the US got somewhere between 8 billion and 20 billion worth of investment in 2021. But, I mean, it's dropped back to circa 1.5 to 2 billion, but it's still the same level as pre-COVID. So I think globally, the adoption of tech in education is still going to be driven by the big factors that drive it. and always have driven it since you and I have spoken
Yeah.
about it, right? Yeah, we've got a massive global skill shortage. We've got a lack of teachers.
Yeah.
So, I mean, UNICEF published it earlier this year. They think that we need 63 or 65 million teachers to get basic education across the world by 2030. So we've got, of which 19 million need to go into sub-Saharan Africa.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's just a massive skill shortage. And ed tech can therefore be utilised to maximise the teachers and lecturers that we do have.
Yeah.
And also internationalise the usage of teachers. So you don't have to be geographically restricted. You can bring teaching resources from all over the world, like tutoring is already doing.
Exactly, yeah.
So I think the opportunities are vast to fundamentally still change. So I would come back to the fact that I think the opportunities in EdTech continue to grow dramatically.
Yeah.
We're seeing that with significant levels of investment continuing to happen. Other areas of the education environment, the vocational EdTech continues to grow because there's just a global skill shortage.
Yeah.
So, lots of employers are now investing to fundamentally transform their own employee base and employ or skill up graduates to make them employable. Yeah. So for us, we haven't seen any slowdown.
Yeah.
We've seen international growth, obviously slow down in the China market.
Yeah.
Understandable what's going on, but still continued confidence of investment and scale up.
That's fascinating. I totally agree with your comments about what happened during the lockdowns and COVID. Parental exposure, massive impact in terms of perception. The move of EdTech from being a nice to have to a necessity. And I think the international ups and downs are leveling themselves out in terms of international students, particularly in the UK. But I think that the same principles apply across the board. You still need great skilled individuals to help scale companies, weather the storm, and scale internationally. And given that backdrop, what do you think is going to be the biggest challenges going forward in terms of either hiring or looking for people in the space?
One, it's continued skill shortage. I would say that, obviously, I'm biased as a headhunter.
Yeah.
But there is already a skill shortage, so it will be the need to be able to access the talent, especially leadership talent.
Yeah.
I think we'll see continued desire for those that understand how to scale up organisations and the need to therefore bring in from cross-sector. And I think we'll see the need for greater internationalisation, because although I feel that in education and EdTech particularly, we should be in a good position to go through the recession, international growth to compensate for the different market fluctuations, different geographic fluctuations will probably be essential for those EdTechs that want to be able to manage the storm as effectively as possible.
And what's happened with? I mean, this is a particular one, and it just something occurred to me. We all, everyone's gone through hybrid working. Everyone's gone through this whole change of the workspace, where even during my career, it's been a revelation and a new learning. How has that affected hiring? Because it occurs to me while we're talking that the world has become really smaller in terms of senior talent. What's that done to your exposure to candidates from further afield, which otherwise would be outside of the scope for companies to be looking at? Yeah,
it's really interesting. It's actually driving a geographically agnostic approach predominantly.
Yeah.
So we can see that organisations, particularly private equity, are looking at individuals and going, we want the best possible talent we can have to lead these organisations. And if they can make it work to be involved in the headquarters as much as they need to be, where they reside is less important. At the same time, you've seen the candidate pool become much more resistant to relocation or emigration.
Yeah.
They're going, well, doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah.
I work from home most of the time.
Yeah.
I travel to meet whoever I need to meet, internally or externally. So the idea I will pick my whole family up and travel becomes less interesting, unless, of course, you are going deliberately into markets that are in growth. So, we're working with a client at the moment that's looking to bring international talent into India.
Yeah.
And people may go because of the sheer opportunity for growth in the Indian EdTech market, for instance. We've seen individuals get interested to get involved with organisations representing the best of Nordic technology. But we are recommending to clients a geographically agnostic approach, because otherwise you shrink your candidate pool so quickly. I've got a client at the moment that's in real trouble for a CEO position because they are not being geographically agnostic. And it shrinks the candidate pool so vastly because people think it is old-fashioned now that you'd have to commit to a certain amount of time in an office.
That's fascinating. The Harvard Business Review this month did a great piece on hybrid working and how that's dynamically changing the resource pool and personal behaviors. And I think that personal behavior is fascinating. Having personally, many years ago, been an expat myself, I don't think I would be an expat anymore because I would just pop in and pop out as need be. And that changes the dynamic and the cost structures and but for in your case, the pool of resources available.
Because we've normally been at an executive level geographically dispersed anyway, because in education the candidate pool is so small.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, if you think that, I remember one of the first assignments we ever did in education was for a sales director for a study group as a major pathway.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's got to be 18 years ago, 15 to 18 years ago. Even then, the talent pool globally was somewhere between 30 and 50 people. And we had to go global to find them because it's such a small pool. But then we had to emigrate the candidate. So I think we've always gone international. The issue is now it's easier because you might not have to actually emigrate the individual. Right. We can tap them where they are and have them operate. Now, I do think that requires, however, a level of sophistication in leadership. Right, because being present and having those water cooler conversations gives a level of engagement to an organisation which is much more difficult to do remotely. So you've got to work harder at that soft engagement if you're going to operate remotely, but thinking that a lot of your workforce is likely to be remote. So therefore, by very nature, you need a different dynamic.
Yeah, it is fascinating how that's changing
so fast.
Yeah, and so far in a 2-year period, it's been turned on its head.
Yes, so. I mean, it was already starting. We were seeing it. You were seeing people wanting to remotely connect, but it wasn't mainstream in any way. And then all of a sudden, Now, obviously, schools can't change that quickly. Universities can't. But those servicing them, around them, can.
Absolutely.
And that allows organisations to access talent they wouldn't have otherwise got. It's very interesting.
So if you wanted a question answered from anyone else who would have come onto this sessions with me, what question would you want answered in education or ed tech?
I'm wondering if we're missing a trick. Is there something in the ecosystem that the ed tech entrepreneurs, earlier mid-stage, are not getting from us wider service providers, the wider ecosystem, that helps? Yes, the European investment environment is improving and we've got better access to money now than we have had at any time. I mean, you and I have been in the space long enough that we've sat at many conferences for a few years where don't invest in ed tech was basically the mantra. That has fundamentally shifted over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years, which is brilliant from a strategic advisory piece. But I'm just wondering, do the entrepreneurs, do the early stage companies have all the support they need, and especially in a very low cost manner in some way, to help them scale? Because it is, the sector is full of very small businesses, usually an ex-academic, some sort of programmer and some sort of commercial individual are starting based on inspirational ideas. But how do we help across Europe, though, that fertile opportunity grow so we can compete with the amount of investment that happens in the US and was happening in China?
Brilliant, Julian. I've known you for so many years. It's fascinating to have you here. Thank you very much for your comments and feedback.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
It's brilliant talking to you. Well, that's another session completed. Julian from Spencer Group. It's really good. Do look Julian up. He's seems to win awards all the time, so it's not one that you'd easily miss. Well, thank you very much. Another session in conversation with completed with myself, and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you.